And I'm joined now by the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls. What's the point of voting Labour if you're going to stick to the same cuts as George Osborne?
Well, look, first of all, the point of voting Labour would be a bank bonus tax to get every young person back to work, not cutting taxes for the richest people, but giving real help to families through more tax credits rather than this tax credit freeze.
But you think this plan is wrong, don't you?
Well, hang on.
And you're going to stick to it?
Hang on. A business investment bank to support a new industrial policy, energy reform to get the investment we need in, jobs, growth, higher living standards, because unless you get that growth, we won't get the deficit coming down. What I was also saying today, though, was if George Osborne's plan continues to fail, not just on living standards and growth, but on deficit reduction too, it's going to be very, very difficult for Labour, and we'll be making choices in a much more constrained environment than anybody's going to like.
Well, why are you sticking to a plan that you say is wrong? From a man who you say has got everything wrong?
Well, look, first of all, I'm saying George Osborne should change his plan now. There should be a £10 billion boost to the economy now, a housing boost, as the IMF has said, to build the homes, get people back to work. Unless we get growth, the inheritance will be very hard. But what I'm also saying is, look, I can't responsibly now, 2 years ahead, say to the country, the economy is failing under the Tories, but Labour will have more money to spend, because nobody will believe that.
Why won't you make a commitment then? I mean, you won't say clearly, I will stick to their spending plans, will you? You want us to think that you will, but you won't actually say it. And that's kind of the kind of, you know, shifty politics people don't like, isn't it?
Look, I think the politics people don't like is people who break promises or say things they don't mean. I can't make promises now 2 years ahead because I don't know where the economy will be. But the direction of travel here is very clear. We would want, in government, to keep investing for growth. But as for current spending, frankly, we'll have to work starting from the plans we'll inherit from George Osborne and find ways to reprioritise within that, like what I've said today on the winter allowance, different choices, different values. But Labour can't go into the next election promising a big spending splurge when the economy is failing under George Osborne.
So the choice that voters are going to get is 3 years of deep cuts under George Osborne or 5 years of slightly less deep cuts under Ed Balls. Is that right?
Well, I think that reduces things to a rather depressing state, don't you?
Well, it's a depressing picture you're painting, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine a position where you wouldn't be cutting for the whole 5 years?
Well, look, 3 years ago, George Osborne said his plan would work, we'd get growth, job creation, and we'd get the deficit down. I have consistently said that austerity economics won't work, and you need a long-term plan for growth, to get the economy moving, to get the tax revenues for the deficit. That's the argument I'm making today in this speech. And a Labour government would have a jobs and growth plan to get the economy moving. But if the tax revenues haven't come in under Osborne, if the deficit is £90 billion, I can't, and nor can the Shadow Cabinet, say 2 years ahead there'd be more money for Labour to spend. But we would do things differently, not just on capital investment, but also on jobs for young people, on an industrial policy, on tax, where our priorities would not be tax cuts at the top, and on the winter allowance as well.
So if you want to spend more now, you're still in favour of a VAT cut, aren't you?
Yep.
And you want the IMF investment spending. Doesn't that mean it's going to take longer to recoup all that money? Well, so you're going to have more spending cuts for longer?
I know, but the problem is, as the IMF have pointed out, that argument is incoherent economically, because George Osborne said, if we go faster, we'll get the deficit down more quickly. He's taking years longer than he planned because he's failed on growth. If you can get the economy moving now, that is actually the way, not just to deal with living standards and long-term unemployment, but also to get the tax revenues coming in, to get the deficit down. I want a deficit reduction plan, but I know I can't deliver that without growth.
All right, and is the winter fuel payment the only universal benefit that you're looking at, or are the others in jeopardy too?
But I've said today very clearly, there's certain parts of the welfare state which are universal. The basic pension, free prescription charges for pensioners. I actually think free bus travel as well is very important for pensioners,
so they're all
for their mobility. For them, I think those are important and universal. I'm not suggesting taking those away, but there's other payments like the winter allowance, which we introduced in government in a universal way when we could do so, which frankly today, if I want to safeguard that, for most middle and low-income pensioners, 95%, I've got to say, to the richest 5% of pensioners with incomes over £42,000, I can't justify continue to pay that to you. I want to safeguard those things so I can keep the winter allowance for most pensioners.